Alright guys, I'm going to make a quick little video here explaining or going into somewhat of a detail how I was able to put a Honda Sidewinder on my mazdaspeed3. So obviously getting the manifold, I got it from eBay. It was like 170 bucks. And then obviously all you have to do is get the MZR flange for the head, cut the SI flange off, weld the MZR flange on, and then hopefully it fits. There are a couple of tight spots, so you have almost some contact with here. One of the studs almost makes a little bit of contact with one of the runners. I don't you can't see it very well, but it's there. And the other point of contact is here. So the valve cover, I had to cut off the breather port here and obviously shave it down quite a lot, almost flat. And then I used a 7/8 14 UNF tap, and then was able to get that bung in there to seal the port. Now it does sit very close to the manifold. I might even touch it, I don't know, but it sits very close. Now I had to make a new 7/8 hole up here for this breather that goes right to the intake. So valve cover, that's going to be one of your biggest problems right here. Now once you run this manifold and you get all of the bolts on the valve cover put on and everything, the one right there is going to be difficult because it goes straight through here. So you're gonna have to use a very tall 4mm. In my case, I'm using the Corksport dress up kit, so that's why I mentioned the 4mm. But other than that, this is the manifold and the valve cover. Right now, I know Grayson has his manifold from Boo Boo, so the fitment might be a little bit different, but for me I had to make a 2 1/4 inch extension here for the turbo, because if not it was going to touch the coolant manifold and the coolant sensor and everything. So that's why I had to extend it more to the side over here. But other than that, everything fits great. Now that's everything for the manifold and the valve cover fitment. A quick interruption in the video. So when I got the manifold, obviously I had to take it back multiple times to ensure the fitment fit right, and obviously me working with my welder, so that's something that I forgot to mention in the video. Now there is a 1/2 inch flange, because the one that I got from Mazdaspeed is a 1/4 inch, but if you can get a 1/2 inch flange, the manifold will probably fit a little bit better and have enough space so that it doesn't sit close to the valve cover and the head. Now as far as turbo goes, I'm guessing some of you guys will be different, but this is a GT 3582. Obviously 4-inch intake. This MAF housing, I got it from MRP Performance. They sell a different variety size MAF housings for the mazdaspeed3s, but I was able to do this sharp 90-degree using an LS intake coupler from eBay, because this was the only 4-inch coupler that had this sharp 90-degree bend that I could find. So plus I was experimenting like 2 years ago, so I had this coupler laying around, saved my life. Now this little stubby filter obviously came from Amazon, no big deal. So that's the intake setup, and obviously the breather port goes over here. I made another 7/8 14 UNF tap here, and I was able to get a 10 AN breather port line. Now for the turbo, this is how the exhaust fits. Obviously I used a 90-degree, but I had to angle it a little bit more to the inside, but I mean it literally fits no problem. So 90-degree here, a straight piece of pipe, another 90-degree over there. Then you have the I forgot what that's called, but the little flex pipe thingy go shooting straight down and then right into the cat back, the rest of the exhaust pipe. But that's how I was able to fit. This is a 4 AN line. Your turbo and whatnot might be a little bit different, so that's all up to you guys, whoever decides to do this. But in my case, the coolant line, since this is a CX7 motor, the coolant manifold does not have the extra nipple that feeds coolant to the throttle body, so I had to use this port right here, add an extra hose, and then get a 7/16 T fitting. So this is feeding coolant to the turbo, and then the cooling drain is back to the factory location where the obviously factory location is. So as far as the drain line goes, so I do have a 45-degree coming off the turbo, and it literally shoots like that right in front of the EGR. It runs underneath the heater core hoses and then into the block. Obviously I have a 10 AN I have a 10 bung in there with a 90-degree, so and it has no kinks or anything. So that's the turbo setup on this car. Is somewhat simple. Took me a little bit of time to figure everything out, especially with the coolant feed, since I had to make my own. The reason I had to make my own is because the wastegate sits right there. If you can see, the EGR block off is right there, and the coolant port is right in front of the wastegate. Like, you can't even fit a 90-degree or nothing. So I had to block it off and get my coolant from here. And so that's the turbo setup on this car. So after you get the turbo and everything, as far as intercooler piping and all that stuff, so obviously have it facing down. This is a 90-degree coupler, and then the pipe that used to run across here for the CX racing, I cut it short, and obviously it shoots down in front of the transmission, and I was able to obviously get it back into the old intercooler piping from CX racing. And then obviously that side is modified because I'm using a ST manifold, so that part of the intercooler piping is modified as well. So 90 that's facing the front, and then the other 90 just shooting straight down. The ECU is sitting right on top of the intercooler piping, and the intake, well, sitting right here, and the hood closes no issues. It makes no contact with any of this, so that's even better. Now as far as the electrical goes, I have the battery mounted in the rear, in the trunk, the wiring. So here you see, this is all the factory connector wiring location and all that stuff. I have this red cable going to here, and then from the fuse I have the cable running underneath the car. It goes over the subframe, but I do have it heat wrapped and everything for that part. And then I have it zip tied to all of the hard lines that run underneath the car on the passenger side, and then the cable actually comes up from the rear seats and into the trunk. But it goes over here, and then I have the negative terminal that used to be a ground here. At this one I moved it down here, and then the other one just runs down there where it should. But I changed this terminal as well from the battery, so I have no problems here whatsoever. And then obviously my boost controller, I had to change it, but it sits right there, no problems whatsoever. So that's the electrical side done. Obviously I have my catch can, it's in the same spot as the old setup. So we've already gone over the manifold, the valve cover, the turbo, the electrical setup, and all that stuff. Now the last thing is electrical. If you can see, for those that have been working on these cars for a while, you know the factory harness runs up here next to the shifter cables, and it's a whole mess. So when I was changing out the clutch and, you know, lifting and dragging down the transmission multiple times, I decided to take all of this wiring harness and get rid of all of the plastic, literally just like bare cables. And then I Tesla taped everything. If you can see, the part of the wiring runs now, or the wiring runs in front of the transmission over here. There's literally no binding in the shifter assembly here, or nothing. So that's pretty good. As you can see, let me go ahead and put my phone down there. There's nothing here. The only thing is that clutch line for the slave cylinder, and then one of the wiring harnesses, I have it running underneath the shifter cables, but everything else is nicely tucked away and out of here. Oh. So here's part of the wiring harness right there, and the rest is just sitting down there. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it that well, but the ECU cables literally run here and then under here. So everything is sitting right here and underneath this motor mount from Damon Motorsports. That's where the whole mess is, right here. I don't know if you can see, but it's sitting, all of it is sitting underneath the motor mount plate. Obviously you have the fuse box running here and everything, and then you have the cables for the ECU. So yeah, literally everything is here away from the shifter assembly. I try to clean that up, as best as I can. Here you can see more wiring, I think. I don't know if you can see it that well. Well, yeah, everything's sitting away. Everything's nicely cleaned up and everything. Now for my setup, obviously I made this little heat shield right here that's covering the high pressure fuel pump from the heat source and everything, because the fuel line is literally right there. I also have this other heat shielding plate right here that shields not only the what is that, the brake booster hose that I have coming up, but the original obviously fuel feed line that's down there. Now both of those lines run underneath this heat shielding right here, underneath the turbo, over the transmission, and then here's the fuel feed line coming here, and then the brake booster hose is down there on that T-fitting right there, and I've had no problems with it. The other heat shield that I had to make was right here for the alternator. I had to double layer it and make like a 90-degree here. So that's the other heat shielding, and besides this, that I already had the whole firewall heat shielded down to the tunnel that runs the downpipe there. But yeah, other than that, that's how I was able to make, or that's how I was able to, you know, swap the Honda sidewinder onto the Mazdaspeed3.